So thanks everyone for joining, specifically our friends, Babesh, Olga, Barry, Alex, and David, for these continuous conversation on geek stuff on video technology and media entertainment. Um, and thanks for all the friends joining. I can see a few Qualibers over there. I can see Casey, Ian. I can see Scott. I can see Brett. So don't be shy. You can unmute at any time and join the conversation. This is not a presentation of a six Illuminati presenting to anyone. It's just six friends chatting, but it could be 7 or 8 or 10 at any point. The idea here is to just share ideas. And the reason behind these Mate Talks is that there are a lot of great presentations out there, but they seem to be really on one direction, and we wanted to try to create new ideas and maybe creating new ideas on top of someone else's ideas. So we're testing these new format. And the topic we had for today was, okay, is there any room for innovation? Because after we discussed NAB, most of us were saying it was most of the same things out there. Like we would walk in the alleys and yeah, of course there are new stuff. There's a lot of product development. There's some new stuff, but is there any room for real innovation? And I recall that during the summer camp, there were very good ideas. At that time, we didn't have Olga here, but we had Besh, Alex, Barry, David sharing like, yeah, there's going to be innovation in video technology or media entertainment, in user-generated content, in virtual reality or augmented reality, of course, in AI, because everyone says AI. So maybe that's the first question for anyone who wants to start answering, like, where do you see there's room for innovation?
I think the only innovation that could take is anything that in this economy would actually be a cost savings or some sort of a project that would either ease things or save on costs. Because innovation in and of itself is great, but with all the tightening budgets and everything else, unless you can justify actual visible cost savings, and that's going to be. Say that again.
Or direct revenue. I mean, it's all about making money. You either need to save money or make money, and you need to say, if I spend $1, it's going to make me $4, or they're not interested.
Exactly, or it has to save you something.
Because R&D is expensive, right? And these companies that had big R&D staffs are the companies laying those people off or laying people off. I think it's hard. It's hard. I think saving costs by automating stuff, maybe there's some room for that with some of these remote production or automated production stuff, but it is hard. It's a tough environment.
And then where does that leave? Like Apple during the WWDC did a bunch of changes for HLS that were mainly geared toward helping give some more information about. Like one of them that got me excited was the ability to kind of dig into the video start time and actually show where issues like what the individual fragments are, like for how long it takes to do DRM, et cetera, and actually expose that to other platforms. Then they've also done stuff. I think some of us were talking about CMCD implementations now, allowing that information to kind of flow out. Those are all more like cost savings and actually nothing to do with cost savings. Those are just more of like measuring quality, which, you guys know I love that. But it's not, it seems like that budget is going away. It's like, well, to David's point, all right, how is that making money and how is that losing money? And so the one other thing that I don't have enough information about, I'm hoping maybe you guys who know more about the HLS spec can figure out, is they've created a new thing now for interstitials, where now you can do like real-time changes in HLS and real-time ad generation, like even within a VOD content. Is that something that can be potentially looked at to say, well, how this becomes a better revenue generator? Because now you can actually recall or recreate the ad call closer to the time of when the person's actually watching it, instead of like really doing a two-hour video for a movie, etc., and kind of pre-filling out the ad call. I know there's a bunch of stuff inside there to kind of tackle, but I think one of them is the only one that actually has like revenue potential inside there.
Well, and that's the thing key you touched on there is that, you know, in the ad space, right, monetization, that's always ripe for innovation and growth because it has direct revenue tied to it. So improvements in things like interstitials, and now that's interstitials is supported also in Dash and Exoplayer. It's now taking that kind of that seamless ad experience down to the client. It does open up more innovation capabilities there, but you know, what all we're doing is improving what's been done, right? At what point are we also going to have something powerful and new that changes things? Because as we continue to improve, the gains are much smaller, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So
just because the ad targeting's better doesn't mean there's ad inventory that actually matches that gets
right.
served, right? I mean, you know, and that's where maybe there's innovation there with a just-in-time created personalized ad somehow or something like that that would actually get me at least someone interested in taking action versus the, you know, the typical either ad repetitions or poorly targeted crud you normally see.
But
Why,
that is a
Barry? You
form
don't
of,
like watching ads that, you know, show you 6 identical ads about migraine medicine?
You know, I don't buy toilet paper. My wife buys toilet paper, so I don't need to see 4 toilet paper ads in a row.
There's a lot.
Someone's not targeting me very well.
There's a lot of innovation going on the ad side, especially within our space, or I'd say the real-time space. Broadcasters are all over that. I think, you know, most people that are working with broadcasters see that. There's massive opportunities in network as a platform. Companies like AT&T and Verizon are working at fever pitch on API work, which this brings us back to old school telco, but in a new IP way. Massive amount of money being spent in it. It's also going to be needed for everything that's going on in AI. I actually see more opportunity out there than ever. And if anybody was wondering too, I'm no longer with Phoenix. As of Monday, I will be starting a new role. I'm staying in the business, but we'll be exploring those things at the new place that I'm at.
You can tell us where?
I'm going to Red 5.
Congrats.
Cool. Good for
Congrats.
I'll be running global business for those guys, but it works out nice because the office is 5 minutes from my house. So anyway, those 2 areas are really there's a lot of growth. And then another spot too is private 5G edge work. A lot of us here, especially, could really contribute and find plenty of business in those areas. So those are the 3 areas that I see right now are really interesting.
I did see that the Olympics are going to be using a lot of private 5G networking, which I think is interesting. And you know, and aside to that, I think, you know, the Olympics have often been a source of innovation, right? So people pour a lot of money into the Olympics broadcasts, and I think maybe we could look to see what's going on there and what's gonna, you know, what that's gonna bring.
and Brett, out of curiosity, like what is it that makes it private? Is it like, are they basically like reserved parts of the spectrum, or like how are they making the 5G private?
It's a great it's definitely a great question. But turning away from that and how it's going to be used, where I've been actively involved over many years, well before the whole, you know, my Phoenix experience and prior to Akamai, but during that era, we're seeing a lot of movement in public safety and military applications and things like that, where interactivity is absolutely needed and real time is definitively needed. But what these applications that I've been involved in and what I'm seeing is rapid deployment. So within 10 to 15 minutes, a private 5G network can be stood up. One of the use cases that I was involved in is it was on a Navy destroyer, right?
A more esoteric version. I remember, well, some of our buddies at Broadcast Out, I'm not sure how public this information is, so I'll just leave it general. But think about a studio where instead of like when they're filming all around, instead of laying like miles of cable all around. If you have a private 5G network and you just put a SIM chip on a camera or whatnot, all of a sudden now that is so much better than Wi-Fi. And now you're getting, hundreds of megabits per second, if not gigabits per second, to an edit room. And now you can be looking and actually actively editing all the feeds coming in from every single camera. And the cameras are now more free because they're not constrained to cables or laying of cables far right. So now all of a sudden your studio becomes a lot more nimble space to run around and get things done. And it saves you a lot of time because now you can start, instead of having to wait for the cables to be laid, you can literally just start filming as soon as possible and things like that. So there's a lot of usage of 5G private.
Yeah, that's exactly right, especially in the eSIM space, as you mentioned. And that's, I mean, outside of public safety, the a big explosion with 5G, or just on cell phones and eSIM capabilities without having to change anything out. You see a new co-opetition market in those areas, but that's a good point, Bhavesh.
So I know that we started by talking about, innovation that sort of supports budget cuts and saving money. But what about? I'll pose the question slightly differently. Like, what are the hard problems that haven't been solved? Like, are there hard problems in streaming that haven't been solved? That after 15 years, you're still looking at it going like, I can't believe we don't have a solution for that yet.
I'm going to push this to Olga because she brought up C2PA last time. I've started digging into a little bit more, thinking about that. Generative AI is like, even since our last call, and generative video has just gotten better and better. I think the problem is not going to be the delivery of the video. The problem is going to be attesting that it's actually your video and that it's not edited or modified in whatever way to make it look or send the wrong message. How do people guarantee the authenticity and the of the video that they have there? And I'm wondering if Olga can talk a little bit more about. I don't hate to put you on the spot, but I think it was really cool. I think that's one of the points of innovation right now that is going to become really important.
Yeah, no, C2PA is the coalition, for anybody who may not know, C2PA is the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And I always have to like slowly say that. But basic idea is to be able to track the source of content. And you said, you said an interesting thing. And I used to say that it's to know whether or not you can trust the content, but in reality, it's just knowing whether or not you know the source of the content. And also see if the content has been modified from source, because you can take a news outlet, modify a few words, and the next thing we know, you have a person running for president saying things that they really are never said, but because you just changed, a yes into a no or something crazy like that. But C2PA actually allows you to keep track of modified frames. But in reality, yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that. I've actually seen somebody bring up the fact that they're starting a business in the direction of keeping track of, fake news and real news and disinformation and whatnot. And IBC Accelerator actually has a project on that topic as well, of fighting disinformation. And it all comes down to knowing the source of it, because I don't know, maybe Alex and I both believe in two completely different things. Maybe he thinks that the earth is round and I think the earth is flat. And, as long as I keep posting that the earth is flat, as long as we know it's my content and not me putting words into Alex's mouth, then it's me. The second question is whether or not you believe me. But, that's a separate topic. But as long as I'm not saying, hey, Alex said this, and I'm not putting words in his mouth, kind of a situation. And yeah, C2PA is it's a standards body that's actively working towards standardizing things around tagging content, if it's generated by AI, tagging content, like tagging the source of content and people and maybe processes that we change to it and so on and so forth.
As far back as like the camera itself, right? So you knew that if this was actually shot through a camera versus generated. So the provenance goes back to all the way to how it was created.
I mean, I've heard of an idea realistically, if you get if you get everybody on board, you take a phone, you add a tag to it. So if I
Right.
record a video and throw it up online, it is tagged that it's generated by me off of my phone, or however they choose to do it. I think there's a lot of things that are currently up for discussion as to how you keep track of it, what, you know, who the certificate authorities are, and how do you make sure that, you know, when I spell New York Times, I spell, you know, Times with an I and not an exclamation point that kind of sort of looks like Times, but not really. And now you have a fake New York Times, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of thought processes around all of that, and that is actively moving. So again, if anybody who's here and wants to look into c2pa.org, please do so, because I think that's a huge thing.
And so, Barry, I think it becomes then for the next level of conversation becomes, well, if you now are starting to encode or transcode, how do you now preserve the metadata from that and pass that along so that people can ensure that although you've changed the structure of the video, you haven't changed the content.
Well, realistically, I'm going to throw something in this mess. You can change the content as long as you say changed by Bhavesh. So now if in my video of the Earth is round, we're showing the Earth is flat, we're showing a round planet with, I don't know, 4 moons. As long as it's tagged by Bhavesh at the end of it, then we know that I wasn't the one who said it's a round planet with 4 moons. So as long as whoever keeps making changes to the content adds their tags, we know who the last source of content is, and we can track to see what was done to it, is the basic idea. You can add unicorns walking around on it, and that's perfectly fine as long as you say you did it and don't try to pin it on me and my flat Earth world.
I always suspected that Bhavesh was a proponent of the 4 moon conspiracy theory.
Yes.
Yeah.
The only gap, C2PA is really interesting, and obviously great companies in there. Although you never really see the spooks, as in the CIA and some of these other, you know, I mentioned some of the other organizations that are tracking it. But I think with a closer look into blockchain, there might be some legs on it. Otherwise, I could find 50 different ways to manipulate even the tags that are being put into spec that's in there. But with a blockchain tie-in, I think it's got legs. But 100%,
Yeah.
I agree with you, Olga and Bhavesh, on what this is representing, and it's an important organization that we should all be following, for sure. There's too much disinformation out there right now. It's ridiculous.
It's almost, especially with the AI side of it, it's almost like the power of that is getting away from our ability to ensure truth or ensure, and it's a race. And I think it's a matter of figuring out how fast can people innovate on the veracity of the video itself and attestation of the person that did it versus the and I'm not sure if this is the right word for it, versus the governmental agencies trying to put a squash on the ability for AI to, or the regulations to prevent this kind of stuff from being created. Because I think it's going to be created no matter what. I think it's much better to say the horse is out of the barn, you know, left the barn. Let's figure out how to make it more verifiable that somebody is telling the truth. So we know that there's going to be videos that are going to be like made up, but how do you allow somebody to say, no, this has not been, or this is my version of the story, and seal, you know, my seal of approval on that, and no one else can touch that.
Well, I don't think that. So define, what do you mean by nobody else can touch that?
Meaning there can be videos that I create about Olga saying, I love unicorns. And there's videos of you saying that I love unicorns, right? But people need to know that you made this video and I made this video of you. Or somebody else, I forget about me, but at least that video of you, forget about everything else out there, but at least you can point and say, well, that's my video of me talking about unicorns.
Well, so there's a whole, it's funny, there's a whole other project that's currently within IBC Accelerator as well, is about digital identity. It probably doesn't apply to me talking about unicorns, but it does apply to celebrity likenesses being used for various things, and
Mm.
partially for, you know, I'll pick on like Keanu Reeves and John Wick. And if somebody starts to create an offshoot, you know, illegal version of the movie, the game in a digital world, is if he is not tagged in that movie and he doesn't, you know, there's a whole chain of custody of how we use digital likenesses. So so that's a whole separate conversation. But if you're talking about, I mean, you can make a video of, you know, whatever, as long as you own it and you say, and when somebody goes, hey, does Olga really like unicorns? You go, and so they can see the video I created and the video you created. And as long as, and then the second part of it is, if your video has no tag on it, then that becomes questionable, and whether or not it's actually really true. Is it fake? Were you trying to do something shady there? But as long as it
Mine's
has
gonna,
an
yeah,
identifier.
mine's gonna be the right identifier because I'm gonna have this in the video,
I like,
and you can't do that.
See,
So-
I think the bigger hurdle in all of this conversation is not even creating the tech, but educating people about it.
Yep.
And teaching people that if you're looking at video in the corner of the screen, there should be, I don't know, a green checkbox or something that says this video has provenance, and as such, you can trust it. And you can, this is how you look up the provenance. And if you are a, you know, I'll use the American politics for the sake of this conversation. If you are liberally leaning Democrat and this video comes from Fox News, you may choose not to believe it. But there is provenance on that. And it does say that was originally created by Fox, and or vice versa, whichever way your politics swing. But I think that is the bigger issue, and having somebody go, oh my God, did you see that they said this online? Well, is there provenance or is there no provenance? Do we
But
believe
even
this or not?
but even if that at base level, like even if there was, you know, the underlying metadata and so forth, you could track that. The only way that this goes to the masses that people would be able to understand that there is like it says, like it shows up like on the player or something like that. But our world is driven by thousands of different players, all developed slightly different. Even if there's standards around that, the adoption, the implementation, and the ability to just, well, I'm going to throw that up every time, you know, is the challenge that doesn't work with our technology today at a core level for that. Now, that doesn't mean that those who are much more savvy and so forth can go and actually, like, you know, run it through a validator, or there's a service or something like that you can do. But for the general masses, it just doesn't, it's not going to apply in the current technology stacks.
Yeah, I think it becomes the responsibility of probably most of the companies running social networks to implement it, right? Because really, like when we look at, you know, where the greatest risk is to you know, spread of disinformation, it comes from social media, right? Because that's where, you know, rumors and misinformation is spread faster than anything else. And so if the companies that run social media networks can, you know, implement this and make sure that it's very clear what the provenance of every video is, then like I think we have a fighting chance, right? But if they don't, then yeah, I agree. Like it's kind of a crazy expectation to expect, like, you know, individual users to go hunt down the provenance.
Yeah, depending on who you believe, it may not be in those social media networks' best interest to do it, right? I mean, you know, they may not have the desire to assert that all their video is real. And then,
well,
you know,
Isn't that terrifying? Isn't that just an overall terrifying thought?
I'd like to
In
think they
general.
would do it out of self-preservation, if nothing else. I mean, like I know it's easy to be cynical.
I'm not convinced.
I think they have to do it out of self-preservation, right?
It's happening now. Well, I mean, I'm an old man now, so, but when I was in the middle of the Napster days, right? We were chasing, yeah, I owned a record company. I was a touring musician, and I had my first startup, digital media on demand. And we were, you know, Olga, we've had this talk, you know, like encryption was important, but my best friend, Scott Moskowitz, the inventor of digital watermarking as we know it, basically was like, you can unwrap, encryption can be unwrapped. So we need something that can be, interwoven with the media. That is always something that's interesting about whether you call it fingerprinting or watermarking or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but he had this idea of barcode for bits, right? So we can, when we encrypt something, we're sort of barcoding. When we watermark something, we're indelibly putting stuff into the fabric of the media. But Olga, you nailed it before on, when you were talking about like, how can C2PA, which I think is a very important organization, when they say CAI as the Content Authenticity Initiative, you've got to be able to wrap up the two most important things: a digital identity, and the other piece that I mentioned before, which is the blockchain. And there is no central authority. I mean, that's kind of the whole point. But I think if those two things can be put together, and then we can put it out there, and Bhavesh, as you were saying too, and Alex, a way that we can have a trusted mechanism, like digital creators. This is people that are trying to actually make money, not the ones that are the shady people that are disinformation specialists, but the average person can actually, see what they've created and share, and maybe the unicorn, lovers can create new unicorn videos and all of that stuff. But it is a scary reality that there are people, and our governments are dealing with it right now, that the disinformation, something can get out and cause mass panic and problems quickly,
Sure.
unless it's 100% said it's.
I like the idea that it could be independently verified outside of any distribution mechanism like the blockchain, right? Or so, because if it is that, you could validate it outside of the scope of anybody that delivered it to you. You don't have to rely on the social network to say it's good.
But a blockchain's not, that's the whole point. It's the blockchain.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah, right.
That's
okay.
Exactly.
But my question
I,
here
I
is,
like that aspect of it.
we said in innovation. So who's willing to pay for all these?
That's a very good question. I guess
you say-
I think
Go
it's at some point news organizations will have to bite the bullet just to make sure that their content is not being misrepresented. And actually, I don't know to the extent of payment, but BBC is definitely one of the founding members of C2PA. So I have a feeling that news organizations and then other content companies who are going to want their content to be not, and I don't want to say not modified, because you can do DRM for that to prevent any modification, but to, control the message to whatever extent you can.
I think, Olga, to your point, I think I liked your other comment, which is people can modify it afterwards, but at least if you can certify that this is the authentic version of it, then I think that's value.
Yeah, but the question was who's going to pay for it, and the content creators who want to at least say, this is my message, this is what I said. You can do whatever you want with it, but I want to make sure that this piece of it is tagged as mine, and if it's modified, it's no longer tagged as mine. That'd be my theory. And then crazy vendors like us who have weird ideas of what you can do with it.
The content providers need to demand that of their tool providers, right? So that, the weight ultimately would be borne on people by us, because we'll need to implement these things for people who are using our tools for production.
It's the whole chain, right? That's the whole point, right? I mean, it starts from the cameras, right? So it's really from camera to player.
Yeah,
and the fun thing is it's going to have to go all the way down to, as Olga pointed out, sometimes this is the camera.
Well, oftentimes that's the camera, right?
Yeah.
And then I wonder, do we run into privacy concerns then, right? Because like now, if there's essentially some blockchain record somewhere of you, originating that video, what if you want to be anonymous, right? Like, what if you're a, journalist in the country that doesn't really like journalists reporting on things, right? So I feel like it's not going to be that easy, right? I think there's going to be some challenges to it.
Yeah, but if you are posting stuff on social media, then at some point you're gonna have to own it. And if you're a journalist recording or reporting in a country, eventually it goes to press somewhere somehow.
Mhm.
Social media under the news outlet account, then tag it as BBC and not
I
assign
think
it to a specific reporter. I mean, if it's going
Al-
public, it has to be tagged by, it has to be posted by somebody, right?
it does, but I think, and this is something that I talked to somebody about. I got introduced to it just yesterday. Alex, I pinged you about our
Yep.
mutual friend that we talked about. Um, and this is why BBC is inside and interested in it, because what they need to do is how can they remove the private personal information from that tag while retaining the rest of the authority of the tag, and then be able to show that this is from verified video from this reporter deep in the heart of whatever country where they don't like journalists, and here they're showing atrocities of blah 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 blah, and it's true, it's verifiable, but we're not going to show you, and we're not going to publish the identity or the location of this person, even though that was originally part of the tagging.
Yeah, it seems to almost go against the idea of provenance, right? Because then, like, now you're saying, like, well, that company, that institution has authority to remove parts of this blockchain track provenance, right? So yeah, I think it's an
Exactly.
interesting problem, right? Basically, because
Mhm.
like these are two goals that are kind of opposite each other.
Yeah,
Yeah, see,
and so
but
it becomes
the argument can be made that if they have the original video from the reporter and somebody questions it, they
Mhm.
have the provenance of proving that it is legitimate to whatever source, but repackaging it, tagging it as, I'm just gonna keep on picking on BBC today. If just call it BBC and post it without saying that reporter X shot this video, you're still claiming that this video is legitimate. We're owning it. And if anybody has questions, it's coming out of BBC. If somebody takes it and makes changes to it and claims it's their own, then BBC has their version that they've owned. But if
Mhm.
somebody goes, well, prove it, let's say it goes to a court of law, and I know you really, at least in the US, don't have to disclose sources and all this other stuff. But realistically, if it had to come down to it, there is tracking of who originally shot it. You don't have to disclose it.
Yeah,
Because
but
all
then
you
I
care
think
about is the last source. So if I'm watching this video and it shows atrocities and it's coming out of BBC, I know that if I trust BBC, I know it's legitimate content.
but I think then you run into the problem of, like, how do you stop somebody then from taking that video that BBC posted, removing BBC from it, and now posting it as coming from somewhere else, right? So you're coming back to the
They-
original problem of provenance.
But then the answer is this. So it's no longer BBC content, it's Alex
Right.
Zambelli content. And if there
Exactly.
is an atrocity with, I'll just keep on picking on unicorns, a unicorn is running through it, then we know that it's an Alex Zambelli video. And if we believe Alex Zambelli that this situation is happening, and if we don't, then it's not. It's not the trusted source, it's the source. So if it shows, and I can't do this because my computer doesn't allow for fireworks, but if it shows fireworks somewhere, thank you, JP, thank you. But if it shows fireworks, we know it happened because it was in the Alex Zambelli video. And if it didn't happen, then the liar is Alex Zambelli, is the point to this whole thing.
Yeah, it's source validation, not content validity.
Thank you. That is what I'm trying to say in my long-winded way.
So-
The source of the, yeah.
I get it. So authenticity of content and all the C2PA it's a major problem, and I think we all agree on that. So we have an agreement, and even more with the Gen AI really growing fast. Do we have any other challenges? Any other big challenges?
Well, I think we touched on earlier, like, hey, look at the Olympics as an example for innovation, and also where some of the challenges come in. I think you can see some there. I think the interesting part, it doesn't necessarily relate to a lot of what we do sometimes from the actual streaming bits, but discoverability is still a major issue. During the Olympics, there's so many events going on, so forth. Every Olympics. It's a rework trying to figure out how can we make it so people can find the content they care about. And that's in the focus. And when you have people who actually are there to watch something that they likely interested in, with some level of where they might also be interested to explore. But as an industry, I think we still have a major issue around there. And there is technology that is being talked about, and ideas, and there's room for innovation around contextual metadata and other stuff that might help some of that. But there's bigger problems in just the platforms and the world that we have right now, and how that works for the end user and the ultimate experience. Because the other element that we also see, and I think the Olympics is another good example, is essentially focus, time, engagement. What that really breaks down to: how do you actually keep the eyeballs once you have them? Attention spans are greatly diminishing. So what does that look like? And things like the real-time solutions and stuff that Brett's done and talked about, even those type of things, I think are an element that shows potential. But those are two big things to me: is engagement and discoverability, that are ripe for major innovations, because it still hasn't been cracked. And engagement won't ever be completely. It's always going to be changing.
Well, it's funny. We talk about solving the video tech problems and the technology behind it, but you're right. It's like there's a user experience problem that we're probably not tackling from the right direction in many cases, and that's an interesting way to think about it.
So how about a plugin that'll help out with the Olympics and usability? So you've got a general stream with an announcer, and you've got all these other languages where people don't necessarily know what's out there. Can there be, now that it's getting really powerful with these large language models, an automatic translation, an automatic announcer model that changes the audio to any language that you want, changes the closed captioning to any language you want? If it can run fast enough now on the edge, on the device, then now you've got a way for a single camera source, especially these, the multilateral feeds, to now be available in any language as needed with one announcer. And that can be done without having to increase the number of transcodes, the number of live streams, the number of bits being delivered out there. You're just sending one feed, which can automatically be flipped around on device.
I'm not sure it could be done on the device now, but it can be done fast enough in the cloud. Well, not yet, yes. But I mean, you can certainly do pretty near real-time translations and captions from a live stream now, with, I don't know, 5 seconds delay, maybe less. They won't be 100% accurate. That's okay. You get the gist. I mean, you don't need 100% accuracy for sports necessarily.
Yeah.
But is that the problem, or is it that there's so much content that I don't even know what I want to watch? Or there's content that I want to watch, but I can't find it.
Right. Can you do, there's some sort of auto summarization in real time that extracts the metadata so I know what to watch. I mean, there's a real problem with the lack of metadata standardization and at least people participating in the standards that exist and exposing that kind of across the board. It's hard.
Yeah, even discoverability is for me a problem. Now we have the Copa America happening in the US. It's football, the real football with the feet, and I don't even know where to watch the games because I have so many services and like a few years
subscription
somewhere. Like
there's no federated search that you can search across all your subscriptions.
Yes, totally. And
there's
some
a
I can do
business model
streaming.
right there. There's a business right there.
I think there are a few startups kind of trying to figure it out, but if Apple
Roku
doesn't play,
Fire TV tries to, like, there's really poor systems for that, but they're not working to the level that people really want them to.
Apple TV tries to do it too. Like when you submit, an app to Apple TV or a channel to whatever, they have some metadata requirements, stuff like that, but not everybody plays. Like Netflix doesn't participate.
Well, and sports rights now are a total shit show.
Yeah, sports is hard, and then especially like when you factor in rights and like what can be watched and where it can be watched, right? Like that's what makes it, I think, a lot more difficult. I mean, there's also like third-party apps and services that try to sort of act as search engines for content, right? And there's a few that work really well for like TV series and movies, but not so much for sports. Like sports is still, yeah, a tough problem. So maybe we add that to the list of hard problems we haven't solved.
I saw, I was able to go to the AWS Summit in LA, and they talked a lot about the AI agents that are being created and the different AI agent models that now people can create within AWS. So I think this would be a great model to have one agent per subscription that you have that can log in on your behalf to Prime or Netflix or Hulu or Disney and ESPN or whatnot. And then when you do a search and say, find me the Lakers, it'll search through across all of them, and then you'll have like orchestration agent that look inside and say, well, this is the best response. Here it is, and here's where you can watch it, and here's what time it is, and automatically create that for you. I think that is something cool to be done, where you're dividing up the work amongst multiple little worker bees, and it's your personal thing because it's only your agent with your account.
There's still this also an industry-wide thing, especially in the sports realm, like with subscriptions. Then, like, well, great. How many subscriptions I need? It's not pay-per-view. It's a mess that's just ripe for broader innovation. But I also don't know what that looks like because it's all at the business level for the most part. It's not. There's a technical element to that, technology element that absolutely can make probably a good difference. But I think this is also one of the things we're running into is that, we can't just solve things in the core tech stuff these days. Is the bigger problems that we're facing, even experience, discoverability, subscription issue, fatigue, and beyond there. It's now so interconnected with all these larger other systems and businesses that we need to figure out how they're going to come together.
What's holding the industry? Sorry, go ahead, Olga.
No, I was gonna say basically what you just mentioned is totally, give me a soapbox and let me go for a few minutes. Because it's actually, as a DRM vendor, it's solved all of the, do we need a subscription or can I just watch this one video? Why am I doing like all of the, I feel like most of the things you just said are basically solved with or can be solved with the tech we have right now. It's the businesses that need to decide they don't need to, have a $3 billion profit, or, what have you, and just let people actually do what they want to do and see where it takes us. Because for me, it was a very interesting thing. We did a survey a couple of years ago where we asked people a bunch of questions, and some of them were, as a business, what rules are you implementing? And then somewhere further down the line, slightly differently worded, was, as a person, what stuff do you hate? And would you like to make a guess as to, how much those two things overlapped? Because as I feel like as consumers, we all hate a whole bunch of these things that are happening in the industry, but the business side of it needs to solve it. And that's going to require some sort of financial investment, which, as we've established, is currently not the goal of this whole exercise.
If there's such a huge problem with churn and for the monthly subscriptions, why aren't they making it easy to do the one-offs? Like, why can't people combine that search and say, hey, look, I'll pay $1 or €1 or whatever for this one event, or $5 for this special event or whatnot? And why force me into having to buy all these subscriptions everywhere else? If I have my own personal budget of X number of dollars per month, I can then pick and choose which major sporting event I want to watch, and people can get the money from there instead of having to.
Because you can't predict revenue this way.
Exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, because they're public companies beholding the stock cutters, and they need to forecast their revenue.
There's just
and they know that even if you sign up just for 1 month, you're likely going to forget to cancel it for at least a few months.
Yep. Because the one-off microtransaction, granted, Farmville made a killing with microtransactions, but realistically, did I just date myself by saying Farmville? But you can't predict revenue, and that's what it comes down to.
So is it that you can't predict it, or people are lazy and they don't want to create new models for predicting revenue? Because if they knew if they knew what content was coming out and they had really good analysis of who watches what, they can do a much better job of figuring out, hey, well, this content is potentially going to do this much, and I think the models can get more sophisticated now, but right
One
now
in
if you're just
hand, two in
lazy,
the bush.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think it's a problem that can be solved. I mean, because like saying that they can't predict the revenue, that's like saying that no TBOT service can predict how many rentals they're going to be every month, right? Like, so I think it is
yeah.
something that can be solved. And by the way, I do want to make one correction to something I said earlier. I said there's no third-party service that solves the sports searchability problem
Mhm.
well. So I just launched my favorite app for this. So it's called Just Watch, and they do have
Oh
a
yeah,
sports search feature, and actually
there
works
you go.
pretty well. So
And Sports
yeah,
There
Watch
you go.
from Sports Bubble, that's what they have
Yep.
as well, and they're working with a number of organizations to create that search capability. So, but even then, that there's a discoverability. Then, and if you even solve the discoverability, then you have the access issue,
Yep.
right? Right now, I think they get looped into one oftentimes, and there's two realms of that. One is just finding what you're looking for, and other times it's finding what to watch when you don't know what you want to watch, right?
But and I think that's where the microtransactions really helps out, is because then when you combine searchability with microtransactions, you can say, hey, I searched for it, I want to watch it, click on the link, it's $1, $2, $5, whatever it is, and you're done. And you've removed all obstacles, and now you can go back into, is this Dash or HLS that I'm watching right now, and am I getting my Dolby Vision inside here, or what the hell's wrong with these people?
So you're saying bring back Blockbuster, but online.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
So
what's old is new again, right? Fast channels and all this stuff is literally going back to our childhood, except for now you can.
Yeah.
I have another question. Maybe it's a crazy idea, but so there's another IBC accelerator project which is on low latency, low delay dash, and so everyone talks about latency, and the I recall being at in Denver, and for my height, and it was Super Bowl, and then all the numbers were like 35-ish seconds of delay, like. So we were
Or more,
discussing
yeah.
the second, 2 second, half a second, 100 millisecond, the dash versus WebRTC, and now we're seeing like half a minute out there,
Mhm.
and everyone's claiming that the problem is out there, like in CDNs and caching and adding bufferings everywhere, because user experience could be terrible. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an expert here. So is there room for a sort of instead of a bitrate ladder, like a delay ladder, that the player could say, I'm not starving, like I could start moving closer to the source, and no, I'm doing terrible, I'm going to start moving away. Would that help? Because I'm seeing.
I don't think you can move closer to the source if you've already played, because then you're altering the content by trying to like reduce frames or something like that in order to catch up and go higher. So I think people would have problems with that. As far as delaying it, I think you're right. I think the problem that I've seen, and again, maybe I'm not educated enough on it, but every time everyone's talking about low latency, they've always talked about like WebRTC and whatnot, and then you have to ask, well, how does that scale to the multiple millions of concurrents? And typically it can't. And when you're looking at just the massive bulk of terabits per second of content that has to go out live and be propagated throughout the entire world in that moment within that fraction of a time, I think for those particular events, you've got to balance out low latency with quality. And I think at that point, especially for something that's that expensive and you're spending that much money on advertising, quality is going to win before
Well,
latency
but yeah,
does.
I mean, and that's only part of it, because like, as soon as you start bringing in ads, even if hey, let's go to interstitials and do so forth, ad resolving can still take oftentimes 2 to 5 seconds to resolve the ad break, right? That's before you even start trying to load in the ad. Now that can all be tuned and so forth to a degree, but like the point is the technology needs to line up within it in all parts of it, not just like, hey, we can deliver it at this fast speed. Well, there's a lot of other pieces and parts we have to worry about: content protection, content access control. What happens when we need to do other variant things, DVR capabilities. Like there's all these pieces and parts that all have to come together within there. So it's still fresh and all the pieces coming, but I do think that the industry is starting to shift and gain and recognize that value in there. And there's also stuff working towards the future. There's Heft right now, which can leverage more of your kind of standard stuff and have the DVR control. And Media Over Quick is looking really exciting for the future. Future is still probably years out, but this is where we see the trends. But it doesn't mean that we're going to get there fast.
Well,
Right.
Well,
and it's got to cost the same, right? It's like I need,
Exactly.
in order for low latency to be really viable in a
Mhm.
massive scale, I can't be paying 4 times the price of my CDN to make it faster.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it also has to go with a business model. If you're watching a live event or let's say a concert, if you're a few minutes, a few seconds, minute, 2 minutes behind, it's not going to make or break anything. But if you're betting or if you're doing
No,
anything
sure.
that requires you to be on time or you're late, or like,
Mhm.
if you're doing, I mean, anything real-time police related or what have you, incident related, if you are 2 minutes late, you are late, and that really there's no point in any of this anymore. So I
Yeah.
think part of it also has to be business model sensitive.
And JP, to answer one of the questions that you asked about, is there room for like some sort of dynamic approach where you decide how much latency you want based on how stable you want the connection? Like
Mhm.
there's definitely been like solutions and options for that. I've seen companies develop over the years. I seem to recall there was also a talk at Demux, I think a few years ago, where I think somebody talked about essentially how do you catch up with live if you're behind live. So if you
Mhm.
fall behind, like, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, how do you now catch up to the edge without the viewer noticing, right? Like, and yeah, like you can speed up video, but not too much, right? And so like there's some really interesting challenges there. But yeah, I know that people and like companies have been experimenting with that for a while. I also want to mention one other anecdote that happened to me recently. I was at a bar and they were showing the NBA playoffs on TV, and they had 2 TVs on the same wall showing the same game, and the TVs were 1 minute apart from each other.
I think
Damn.
one was over the air, one was direct TV.
No. They were both streaming. They were both streaming. They
that's-
were just not in the same place in the manifest, right? And so one was on the live
That's
edge, and the other
crazy.
one was like a minute behind. And so of course they had to go like like mess with the remote and try to like get back to the live edge. And it was hilarious because like in broadcast you never had that problem, and now it's like,
Right.
Yeah.
oh right, sometimes it's not just a matter of like me not wanting to hear the neighbor cheering before I see the score. Sometimes it's a matter of
Yeah.
like you have multiple displays in the same space. How do you synchronize them, right? It's not even a question of are they all 5 seconds behind live or 20 seconds behind live. It's like, how do we make sure they're actually both the same latency behind live?
Or how do you synchronize them among millions of users?
Yes. Yeah.
I had a question. Maybe I missed it. Well, you guys all know where I came from, so
Yeah.
the world of being able to deliver to millions of people is real. I mean, there's no, and I feel at least proud, after having left Phoenix, that like at least for the past year and a half, and for those that are in it, Dolby, wowza, we collectively, I guess, all proved to a certain extent that you could hit scale. Pricing's another story because you're dealing with
Yeah, exactly.
But JP, I kind of missed it there. So there is AVR, like on the WebRTC front, certainly Phoenix was one of those companies, and there's Dolby's doing it too, just maybe a different ladder. Wowza. There are AVR ladders there. It is set, but maybe if I put myself back in my days of Akamai, when I built, like, say, America Mobile CDN with 22 countries, they were running into problems moving from the their HLS days to where they are today on scale. I didn't see anything that's different there. But bringing it back to why you need to have it, and Olga popped that out there, and I think you nailed it again, is interactivity or betting requires in those areas, but generally interactivity and some of the things that we've been talking about today: engagement, discoverability, user experience problems. These are the things that we should all be focused on to solving, and that will bring us all money. It's, my son at 17 years old, and all, even myself, just being active in social media or whatever, those are the things that I require. And if you want stickiness, to our friend Casey, right? Paramount, my other friends over there, Darren Lepke and so on. If you want me to stick with your stuff and not move on to the next guy's stuff, give me what I want. Give me a place where I can discover stuff, give me content, and my next foray, like, I don't give a shit about like broadcasters, honestly, trying to battle to the bottom. I don't care.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting involved in the betting side of things. I just don't care about that. Like, again, it's a race to the bottom. And as Olga said, their profitability has to be at 3 million%. And they're screaming at her or me or us for our high pricing, which isn't even high. And they're making gazillions of dollars. Like, so I'm a little lost on it. I think the scale thing is there. I do agree with some of you guys on HESP, although don't give me another thing I have to pay for on top of what they're doing. And I do believe that media over quick, is going to be a big deal someday in the future. But this group here, there's a lot of talent. We could solve a lot of problems like right now. I don't know. Maybe again, but I was lost on the AVR comment because it's being.
I don't think he was talking about AVR. I think he was talking about like having the option is similar to AVR and correct from JP, but a list of like, hey, I want to be able to control my latency and I can use these different streams or this different technology. There's even a user option of how close to the actual live point I want to be. And I think you were talking about having it automated where it's like, hey, listen, I have a really healthy connection and capabilities. I can now go lower latency automatically because I have that throughput versus, something that's more like, user driven or so forth.
My last point.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I don't think anybody cares. Honestly, quality, that discussion is more of an industry thing. Quality means nothing to the betting community, to a variety of other communities. It means zero. I keep hearing about this quality thing. When are we getting to 4K and all this other stuff that's being pushed on us?
It even means zero.
That
sports.
pains me personally.
To me,
do you recall? Go for it.
To me, I think what's way more important than low latency is shared experiences, unified experiences, having everybody at the same time, even if it was 20 seconds delay. Like you try to use this excuse, like, hey, I don't want to get a Twitter and have it ruin it. It takes 20 to 30 seconds for someone to write a Twitter, right? On average. So having users actually shared same time code is actually way more important, I think. And that could be applied into our existing technology differently and so forth versus, hey, we're going to solve that. We're going to get that what we want, that shared experience, but we're going to do it by just leveraging low latency. That's just one way to do it. And it's not the best way, right? In my opinion, it is the easiest way today, maybe, but that doesn't mean that we're solving the real problem because the problem shouldn't be we have to go to the lowest latency. Then we do have all this problem with ad injection and this other stuff. And you can do it, but it becomes far more complicated, more risky, more lost opportunity and so forth. And that's just one example. But to me, the innovation, to go back to our original theme of this, is where we have an opportunity is how we could create technology around truly creating proper large scale, full scale. And I'm not just talking 1 million users, I'm talking 7, 12 million users. In a perfect world of unified experience.
Let's just standardize latency and get it over with.
We can't even standardize how to measure latency right now.
We're trying to.
Oh, you wanted innovation, right? You wanted unicorns. So there you go.
SVTA is trying to standardize how to measure latency, but even then it becomes very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think so a couple of thoughts here. One is that to your point, Brett, on quality, I totally agree. On sports, no one cares about quality, and you can see all the people watching sports on airplanes. I recall a DMAX 2019 talk, a guy talking about like it was like TV from the 80s, but people were paying to watch a game live on an airplane at a fraction of a megapixel. But and on the delay thing, I think it's even if you see, I saw a post not long ago. I think it was Sky, but I might be wrong, or Comcast. Like their own app was showing the NBA game statistics a few seconds ahead of the video. So if you would go to watch your stats in your own application, you would see one result, which was like 10 seconds after the one you were watching in the game. So in the same screen, you would get two experiences in the same vendor. Like no one else.
Yeah, that's a bad design.
Yeah, but the problem is that the person working on the design of the statistics, working for a variety of devices and players and ecosystems, and then there are people working for the Roku app and for the iOS app and the Apple TV app and the Android TV app and the whatever 100 devices we have out there in all the formats we have, in all the versions we have, and the connected TVs with the old players. And so, yeah, certainly there's a lot of room for innovation.
That's a different conversation. That's a business culture conversation, because that means that the engineering teams and the product teams around there create a lot of specs, but didn't actually watch and to see how the actual implementation of all the specs was created. And I remember, because I know David has solved this problem already multiple times, but it's much easier to do with a small team that has control over everything, is you have your design and that was one of the biggest issues, to make sure that when we're doing statistics, that the video is going to be lined up with the time code, and then it was all set. And so they took care of that when it's a group of people that actually has, you've got clarity across the board and everyone knows what they're doing. I think this is going to go back into cost savings. People are letting go other teams, and now you've got a bunch of teams that are no longer communicating. And therefore you've got the specs that are going out there without anyone actually paying attention and looking at a cohesive delivery to the end customer. So that's
just to your point, Bab. I had 2 calls with the same large operator, huge operator. And on one end, I was talking to the CDN people, and they were saying, we want to implement CMCD. We want to reduce the Conviva costs. They're killing us. Then I was talking to someone else, and they were saying, oh, we're starting to add some of the new Conviva features on latency measurement. And so on one end, they wanted to reduce their Conviva contract, and someone else in the same company was working on implementing the new Conviva feature. So it was like, it was going to be a sort of a loop in which someone's implementing CMCD and then someone's adding a new feature that CMCD doesn't have. And it's like, you're going to spend like probably 10 times the money now.
Yeah, as a small company, I always forget that in a lot of places, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting to think about the amount of budgets that go into all of that.
Totally.
It's companies scale differently. Just because you're large doesn't mean that you're well organized.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, it's usually the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so it's we've been over an hour here. I could continue chatting with you, all of you guys, for probably 3, 4, 5 more hours, but I think people are starting to get bored. Yeah. So is there any final thoughts you want to share on these? We discussed C2PA and content authenticity. We discussed and provenance. We discussed latency, content discovery, subscriptions. Any thoughts? Any final thoughts you want to share?
It feels like we proved there's lots of problems we haven't solved yet. We may not be looking for them in the right places.
Yeah.
And we barely mentioned AI, which is amazing.
Right.
We went like for a whole hour talking about innovation and problem solving, and didn't even like talk about AI. Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
There you go.
Yeah, I gotta say, mission accomplished. 1 hour without talking about features only AI. Oh, and please spot Nico and Clementina, Mika. Look
Is
at
she
that.
the youngest qualabbers now?
Yeah.
Yay.
She's learning
Can we
how
make
to
that
code.
big? There he is.
Yes. Hi, Clement.
Hello.
So with Nico and Clementina here, I think we've had more than enough, and there's a little room for innovation. Look at
She's
Nico.
getting
He made
fussy.
a small version of himself. Thank you all, and see you in a couple of months in the next Mate Talk.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
Thank
Bye, guys.
you.